Thursday at 12 p.m. and we'll bring you insights from leaders in business, economics, sports on how to adapt and grow during this time of crisis. At FRS, we've been providing talent solutions to organizations since 1980. And with this being our 40th year anniversary, we've seen many ups and downs really in business over the past 4 decades. So we thought it was an ideal opportunity to support our clients and partners by bringing them insights from experts in different fields. Just some housekeeping. There's a chat on the right-hand side. So any questions you'd like to ask our panelists and guests over the next few weeks, if you just type them in there, and we'll pick them up and we'll try and answer them as best we can. Also, just down the bottom of your screen, you'll see a poll, and each week we'll be asking some questions and polling people on what their I suppose their thoughts are on the economy, on I suppose businesses, and on what it's going to do to things like unemployment and that. So our poll this week is on how quickly you think the economy will bounce back. Will it be, in the next month, the next 3 months, the next 6 months, or maybe over a year or 2 years? Which brings me to my 2 guests today, all the way from the People's Republic of Cork, Susan HayesCulleton, also known as the Positive Economist, entrepreneur, lecturer, and author. Welcome, Susan. How are you?
Thank you very much, Colin. I'm great, and thank you very much for having me here today.
Good. My second guest is Kevin Greene, renowned HR leader, previously head of HR for the Royal Mail in the UK, and he's been strategic HR advisor to many of the UK and Ireland's most successful businesses. I got to know Kevin when he was CEO of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, and I was president of the National Recruitment Federation. And since 2018, Kevin has been an advisor to the FRS group of companies in our recruitment training and tourist new business, and then has, I suppose, helped us become leaders in our field in a number of sectors. Welcome, Kevin. How are you doing?
Hello, guys. Broadcast or not?
Yeah, we can hear you a little bit, Kevin. There, maybe what we'll do
see or hear Colin, I'm afraid, so I'm struggling.
All right. Look, we'll carry on with Susan for the moment, okay? And I suppose Susan, in terms of the economic view, and I suppose which is really your speciality, what's the big difference really between this crisis and maybe the last recession we've seen from 2008 onwards?
One of the key issues that differentiates between the two is the speed, and I don't have to tell anybody about just the sheer steep decline that people have seen, particularly over the last month. So it's now the 16th of April. Exactly a month ago, of course, it was the day before Patrick's Day. So by then our schools had been closed, but we hadn't gone into full and complete lockdown. So from that point of view, what we need to be considerate of is just the speed in which this has fallen. And of course, that has led to an awful lot of huge issues, and how people have had to make decisions very, very quickly. So as we look forward, of course, and that really is what matters, is what we need to be considerate of is how quickly that we can respond to this. And that's down to 2 things. The first of all is the productive capacity of the economy. So how do we preserve the economy? How do we actually preserve the infrastructure that we had? Because as you well know, certainly, Colin, as you would have well known, there was people who were in a position where they were trading absolutely perfectly in the middle of February, and then by the end of February, their businesses were hanging balance, and that was very, very different to 2008. So preserving the productive capacity of the economy is absolutely key. So when we look at that, that is where the key, the wage subsidy scheme introduced by the government has been very important. And up until yesterday, that was where 70% of wages below a certain level were going to be paid by the government, and then after that, the employers were invited then to top them up and to keep them maintained at that level. Now, that certainly has had a huge impact. 255,000 people are now availing of that scheme. But it did present 2 challenges. The first one was that people on lower paid part-time work, they were walking away from it because they were basically saying, well, why would we bother working when we could actually earn as much by not working or even earn more by the COVID-19 €350 pandemic payment. So how that's been dealt with now is that there was an announcement yesterday that is now going to be increased to 85%, and the wage subsidy would be up to 85% and up to 24,400. And if the employer wants to pay more than that, in other words, if that person is going to be paid over 100% of their wages, that is now allowed. So similarly, on the other side, the question was, what if people are getting paid a lot of money? So what if people are being paid higher than the amount announced by the government? Well, then what would happen there? So yesterday, there was also further announcement that if net pay had dropped below €950 per week, then they could get 300, and if that was a cut representing 20%, then they could get a payment of €205, and then if it fell below that to 40%, then they would get an additional payment of 350. So that's been a key element around the productive capacity of the economy. And the other key issue, and this didn't happen in 2008, is of course the physical fact that so many bricks and mortar shops have now been closed, and they haven't been closed by the market, they've been closed by the government because of course we're seeking to flatten the epidemic curve. So when it is the case that the government tells shops, in fact mandated shops at this stage to close, well then of course that presents another problem, because how can bricks and mortar shops open? And the only way to do that is online. Now, here is where Ireland was underprepared. And this, Colin, we've been banging the drum around this. When I say we, I mean collectively, whether it was the government or whether it was business bodies or whether it was business people. And the fact of the matter is that last year, and that's the only figure, the latest figures that I have on an annual basis, is that Ireland spent 16 billion online. The problem is, of course, is that not every business is online. In fact, there are only 32%. 32% of all websites are not at all. So when you take that into consideration, then people simply can't spend their money with them, and that presents a huge issue. And this, of course, is where up until last week there was the online trading voucher, which was 50% funded. So I could get, if I spent €5,000 developing my website, I could get 2,500 back from a Leo. I had to get 3 quotes. I had to attend a one-day trading seminar on it, and then I could draw down the money. Now, the change in that announcement is, first of all, you can now get 2. So that means that you can get up to €5,000 support. And secondly, the online trading voucher now only needs 10%. It only needs 10% co-funding. So that's also helped. But I mean, to a large degree as well, this is down to individual businesses taking action on that point. And the third thing that I mentioned, and I'll hand it back to them, is there's a lot of supports out there for businesses that may, and I know that I know that we're talking to a range of audiences here. So what I said is around the online trading voucher may not be suitable for everybody, and particularly for larger businesses. But I do want to talk about one thing that is very suitable for businesses of varying different sizes. It's completely untapped. I have personal experience of it, and in my own mind, and please feel free, anybody who wants to chat and either ask more questions about it or disagree with me, I'm able for both, is the Innovation Partnership. Now, what this is, so we did this, so I'll walk you through how this worked. So if you have an idea for innovation, innovation, of course, is expensive. An awful lot of it will fail because, of course, innovation is something that hasn't been done before. The reason it may not have been done before is it may have been tried before and failed. So a lot of innovation will, by its very nature, it is going to be high risk. So it's not really suitable to borrow off, and can be not always very investable. So the Innovation Partnership is where you can apply for an Innovation Partnership feasibility study, so of any company of any size, and you can get a €9,000 grant to investigate an idea. Now, what that money will be, that €9,000 will go to a university, and that university will then appoint a research assistant to investigate the feasibility. So we did this back in 2017, and at the end of this, then we decided an idea that we had merit, and then you can apply for €200,000 with the Innovation Partnership, where 80% of that funding comes from Enterprise Ireland and 20% from the company, or else 60% funding from Enterprise Ireland, 20% cash from the company, and 20% in kind from the company. So that was the option we took. We got €125,000 between all of those sources. In other words, it was 60% cash from EI, 20% cash of our own, 20% of our own in kind labour. And so we investigated an idea. The first year of it, we realised that the initial idea didn't have market potential, but then the second year we realised that it did. So at the end of this, here's how the mechanism now works. Is now we pay a royalty back to the university up to the tune of what the money provided by Enterprise Ireland based on our revenue. It has the best characteristics of debt and equity. In other words, if we decided not to license the innovation that was produced at all, that was it. That was the money it was finished. On the other hand, since we did decide that we did feel there was market commerciality from it, we could license it, and then we could repay it back in line with the revenue generated. So therefore, it has flexed to move with you. And now we've applied for our next feasibility. We're at the very last stages of that. So the point I'm making here is that the economy needs three things. It needs to maintain the productive capacity. It absolutely needs that. That's key. And you know, we're doing okay there. Businesses are hanging in, and those who are on the fence, and when I say that, whose revenue have fallen about 25% or more, can avail of the wage subsidy scheme to hang on. Then we also have, as I mentioned, we do definitely need for the retail sector in particular, 111 billion is how much Irish people spend, 16 billion of that is online, and about 70% of that goes outside of the country. And as I mentioned, only 32% of websites aren't e-commerce enabled. So that issue needs to be fixed fast. And then, of course, the third thing is, my concern for the economy is in the medium term is, once bitten, twice shy. Will the risk capacity, or will the hunger for risk and hence innovation, will that then be rolled back? And that is where the brilliant scheme exists that I have personal experience with, very successful experience with on all stakeholders. So I definitely encourage people to do that. My final point before I go back to you on this as well is that, you know, while of course we are talking about the economy, and I'm talking about what's working well and what can work well, at the end of the day, we all know that this is the cost of taking care of people's lives. Of course, that has to come first. I think that there's an empathetic understanding of that around the economy and around the world. That doesn't say that it's easy, but it's just kind of what we have to do. And also, of course, there are businesses that simply that won't be able to continue under the current environment, that already haven't. On average, there's around about a 1.9% business exit in the country, and predominantly that is not because of a lack of profit. It's because of family reasons. It's because companies simply, the people who set up companies find that it's too much of a work-life imbalance. Of course, we are likely to see those figures change, and that's where we have to be really careful in the next stage, which will be the reboot phase, about how we encourage new businesses to get started to service that demand that is likely to come down the tracks. Both, of course, as we're about to move on to people, both in terms of recruiting people as well as servicing customers right around the world.
Great point, Susan. Really great point. I think there's so many, I suppose, opportunities for organisations there to tap into both funding and supports, you know what I mean, that are out there, and you really need to be on the ball from that perspective, you know what I mean, as an organisation, and make sure your financial departments and I suppose people departments are looking after all that sort of stuff. Kevin, we're going to try and bring you in one more time, and if we don't, I think we'll have to sort of leave it maybe for this week and catch you next week. But what's your thoughts at this stage, Kevin? Well, that's not. It doesn't look like it's going to work, Kevin. So we'll sort of move on. Susan, just back to you. In terms of obviously the government has a choice now, right? So it doesn't really have a choice in I suppose deciding between where the economy goes and people's health, but that's really the choice, really, not just for the Irish government, but for governments throughout the world really are looking at, when do we turn on the tap and, you know what I mean, let businesses you know, crank back up again, and how do we hold off? Because I think, you know, for the 12-week subsidy, say all the supports that are gone in, government subsidies, did I read somewhere it's about €4 billion a quarter it's going to cost the Irish economy. So effectively, you know, obviously that 4 billion a quarter runs into 8 billion, but probably there's the cost of the 8 billion, say if it ran to 6 months, but the bigger impact on the input side in terms of taxes is going to be actually, you know, exponential, really, isn't it? So how do they weigh that up? How do the government, do you think, sit down and what do you think the thinking will be in the Department of Finance around that?
Okay, well, first of all, very happy to answer that, and maybe Colin, since we unfortunately don't have the benefit of Kevin's expertise today, if I could put a couple of questions to maybe when I finish this point about the people side. You're all things expert in that. Okay, so the figures are 3.7 billion of stimulus, including the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the wage subsidy over 12 weeks, affecting 800,000 people. That is the figure. That's the headline figure that equates to around about 300 million a week. Yeah, of course, that you can't keep going on with that forever. But I thought it was interesting yesterday that Pascal Donoghue put a figure on what would have happened if this didn't happen. And we currently, well, sorry, I won't say currently, at the end of February 2020, we had 2.3 million people in unemployment. If this didn't happen, you would have had over 1 million people availing of social welfare. And of course, other 1.3 million people simply just wouldn't have been able to sustain that. And we would have been in very serious issues in the very, very immediate term. But the question is, of course, what happens in the intermediate term. Now, I think myself, we have to learn a lot from what's going on around Europe. I mean, Austria on Tuesday opened up their doors to some shops. Germany is staggering. They're really, really staggering the way in which they're reopening. Simultaneously, they're actually having more stringent issues on lockdown as well for different demographics, which is probably a smart thing to do. Of course, we've also seen that Spain went back to work, and some people went back to work in Italy as well. So we have to learn from that. I think the way in which this is going to unfold is going to be it's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a challenge on a number of issues. Economically, I think I suppose if we take a Venn diagram and we take what's the most pressing in the economy and what's the most pressing outside of the economy, we put the two together. I think what sits in the middle, we'd all agree, would be housing, and because housing we need it from a completely non-economic point of view, like we simply need it from a social point of view, but from a health point of view as well, is that the average age of the construction worker is younger than, well, it's certainly the average age of a construction worker is under 50. Also, they're more likely to be outside. Social distancing can be a challenge, but it's certainly not as much a challenge as in other areas. So I would anticipate that coming back first. And the Construction Industry Federation yesterday made that announcement that they are, kind of lobbying the government in order to be able to do that. So I think that would be the first in the infrastructure around them, like the hardware stores, and then I think the other thing, of course, is non-essential manufacturing, which very quick, soon becomes essential. But I think the challenge for the government actually, I think it has a couple of things to bear in mind. One is, where is this going to be funded from, right? So in essence, there's 4 places that can be funded from. One is from the taxes generated by the resumed economic activity so far. 2 is from is simply from the we'd say the opportunity cost of the other hand is higher. Now that's not an intrinsic form or an extrinsic form, it's an intrinsic form of funding. Then the other thing as well is that there are slight cash balances in the economy, but they can be bolstered and will be definitely by the way in which the government's borrowing. We borrowed 6 billion last week, and no problem to us at all. Investors were willing to offer 33 billion, and we've got a very low cost of borrowing at the moment, and that will be sustained by, and without getting too economic about it, the monetary policies of the ECB. The ECB have said, look, we will buy bonds until the cows come home, basically, to keep the cost of borrowing low. And then the fourth thing, and this is very tricky, is the interaction between Europe and specifically the Eurozone and individual countries, and that's proven tricky. I mean, I got the notification last week, like a lot of you did, to say that there would be 500 billion of a rescue package was announced from the Eurogroup, and yet at the same time, after that, then Italy wasn't happy. They're still not, and you wouldn't blame them. A lot of that really is in loan guarantees, which isn't the same as cash. So there's a range of issues along with that, but I think that's going to be incumbent on the EU to deal with that along the way. But one issue, and here's where maybe I'd like to go back to you on this, Colin, is culturally, how do we deal with this in terms of people? Because when we talk about industries or regions, that's we can be relatively straightforward in this. But what if you're allowed back to work and I'm not? And like, is it the case that you think that people would be coming back into the workplace? Is it people who are of a certain age, of a certain, I suppose, importance in the business? Is it people who have a certain geographic radius? Is it people with kids? Is it people without kids? Like, how do you see culturally how this is going to be introduced when this phasing of companies comes back in, and how you think that will be handled, we'll say at a HR level and also from a cultural level?
So look, that's a really interesting question. I think where we are at the moment, and our clients and the organizations we deal with, that's the big question, is like, how do we retain the talent we require, you know what I mean, to get through this, yet make sure we stay afloat in the meantime, right? So I think the government scheme, the 12 weeks, really, that is, they've given us a lifeline, given every organization a lifeline to actually get through those 12 weeks. But it's really what happens after. Obviously, there's a question about do they extend it? You know what I mean? Which it's just really hard to tell, and it's very, very much a timing thing. So I think most organizations are looking at the people they have, and you know, most of them see it as a resource, and they I suppose want to keep those people on, really. You know what I mean? And we had a talent shortage before the crisis, and we're going to have a talent shortage after the crisis. Ultimately, we've seen. We've seen, I suppose, lots of organizations really looking hard and not being able to find people. So, you know, at the higher end, in terms of technical skills, in terms of, innovation, etc., manufacturing, we've seen probably 5 or 6 years of a depression in terms of finding talent. My belief is that when we come out the other end, that's going to still be there. We're going to still require those people. Ultimately, you're going to see I suppose within IT, we haven't really seen the drop, say from our recruitment business on the IT side. Yes, we've seen things push back a little bit, but we're still seeing organizations hire. Obviously, within retail, hospitality, those type of industries, absolutely are effectively in shutdown at the minute. So one of the things I've been sort of thinking about this over the last sort of 24, 48 hours, and what people are calling a bounce back. I'd almost call it a slingshot type of situation, which is going to happen. So effectively, you know, when the tap is turned on, you know what I mean, how does an organization ensure that it's ready to, I suppose, make the most of that and adapt to that? And ultimately, that's through people. The question mark will say, you know, if you take a small restaurant in the middle of Cork or the middle of Dublin at the moment, how do they actually, you know, take advantage of that pent up demand for, you know, a product or a service or just a social or cultural type of thing? So, and effectively, I don't see those industries bringing back 100% of their people on the first day they get back into business. That's just not going to happen, because one, they're not going to have the, I suppose, the capital to do that. They'll have lost money in the interim. Two, a lot of the people they had either won't be available or won't be in a position to return to work straight away. So we're going to see this sort of, I suppose, push and pull sort of factor happening from a talent perspective. And even like at a local level in terms of building and you know, people having work done on their houses, you know, extensions, you know, as you said earlier, house building, that demand is still going to be there next time around. Mm-hmm. It'll create a demand for talent. We're seeing at the moment, I suppose, look, the other day, and we're involved in it in terms of how do we support farmers who are growing food at the moment, and that type of thing, and getting people into the country to actually work in vegetable farms and all that type of thing. So it's sort of an unreal scenario at the moment. In terms of what we are seeing out there. But I think most organizations are looking at, and the big question for them is, how do we maintain that talent on our payroll so that we can effectively slingshot back when things happen in hopefully a couple of months, really. I think in terms of the labour market, obviously we're involved on the Torres side in helping people back from unemployment. We've placed over 42,000 people back into employment in the last 4 years in that part of our organisation. And I think it's one of the critical things, and you talked about culture. Really the challenge is, I suppose, at the moment we have this sort of, we're all in this together. Okay, so, and the health, I suppose, crisis is masking the economic and potential unemployment crisis we could be facing. So people are all at home, you know, it's a surreal or unreal sort of situation, and it's like we're all in this together, we're all pulling together. But what you will find is, as the economy starts to, I suppose, move back into some sort of normality, people will be left behind. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It happened. It has happened in every recession. From the 1930s and FDR's sort of program of reinvigoration of the American economy through to, I suppose, the early 80s, through to our last financial recession. People get left behind. And this time, one of the, and I suppose it's not really on the radar, but one of the key areas that have been affected this time is around self-employed people, right? So what I would call, I suppose that upper gig worker, okay? So people who are basically out there doing gigs, averaging, fairly decent salaries. You know what I mean? There has been very little safety net provided for them. We see an awful lot of people who work with us directly in that and provide services to us on that. As I suppose being left a little bit high and dry at the moment, and they've had a long way down. Effectively, if you're in the training businesses, you would know this within your Savvy Teen Academy business. Anything where there's been a face-to-face interaction is effectively. So we've seen it in our training company. We, have a lot of self-employed tutors who work for us who've effectively been laid off, and as have most training industry across the country. Now we have a lot of them working on an online platform at the moment, which is great. And you mentioned it at the start, where we were all talking about, we need to get online, But a critical thing for anyone during this period is what the future holds ultimately. You know what I mean? We've seen in the last week two of the areas. Amazon has hired over 200,000 people in the US in the last month. 200,000 people is absolutely enormous. But to me, it's really how do we support those local businesses, those local shops, and those type of things to get back up and running. To compete, obviously they need to compete in a social sense, you know what I mean, and that's how they will, and they provide to me obviously a better service and a better I suppose journey for people in terms of retail than an online service does. But we've got to migrate a lot of our business online, and I suppose what happened a month ago, we were all already through automation and artificial intelligence. We were sort of on the road to sort of displacement of workers in particular areas. And it's a pity Kevin's gone, because he talks about the hollowing out of the middle, okay? And that whole area of middle jobs in the economy being hollowed out by automation. And what we'll see, I've seen lots of surveys in the last couple of weeks, organizations are going to invest really, really heavily in automation in the next 6 months, year, 2 years. The bigger organizations, particularly, and I suppose automation and robotics. And one of the ironic things, I worked in retail in a previous life about nearly 30 years ago at this stage, 25 years ago. And Ireland had back then, I suppose, a lot of clothing manufacturers, production manufacturers. Effectively, Ireland has no clothing or production manufacturers at the moment. And it's quite ironic when you look at the things like PPE. Ireland would have been able to produce that PPE within days 25 years ago, yet we're reliant on those, and you probably can comment on this, around what that world economy is looking like. I think we're going to see a pushback to a large degree on this outsource of manufacturing to the Middle East and China. The US has already said, look, they're going to take back in their country what's going to happen, and I think it will have huge impacts for many. Luckily, I think Ireland is a very open economy, and we have the capability, I suppose, to pivot really within those sectors. But we've really got to look ahead and sort of see what the challenges are, and maybe we'll talk about opportunities in a little while. But I think in terms of the labour market, I was looking. I did a presentation the other day on when I suppose our last recession. So Ireland easily out of the last recession in Europe, probably apart from Greece, had the worst outcome. We went from effectively zero unemployment to 16.8% unemployment in the course of about 3 years. So it was a catastrophic effect for a huge amount of people who've never been unemployed before. I think my prediction would be that we will see a bit of a slingshot and a bounce back, and probably unemployment will level out at between 10 and 12%. After about the initial 12 months, and then it really depends on, I suppose, world factors. Like we had I suppose, an impending world recession on our doorstep anyway. So you know what I mean? Is that going to come to pass? Germany was at more or less zero growth for the past 12 months, and Europe wasn't in a great place. And it's amazing how everyone has forgotten about Brexit in the last month, including Britain and Boris. So what's your thoughts on that, Susan, in terms of, you know what I mean, that whole sort of economic sort of change at a macro level, really, in terms of manufacturing and production, and where things will actually will happen?
Well, in line actually with what you just asked me, a question did come in, Colin, that I'm going to quickly answer during my own answer, but I think it's more so one for you, and that is, this is from Ger. He said, "Hi folks, I'm interested in your opinion on the following. Do we think working from home has been scalable and effective during its biggest test?" So I think a lot of people would be interested in your view on that.
So I'll just kick off on that one first. So in FRS, we employ over 2,500 people, right? So probably 80% to 90% of our people worked in offices, or, you know what I mean, apart from, I suppose, people who worked in agriculture, who worked out on farms and that type of thing. But effectively, we had to pivot a month ago to having 100% of our people working from home. And I suppose I got to give a hat tip to our IT team. We effectively turned that around in 3 days, going from everyone working in an office to everyone working at home. Now, the first week or two were a little bit challenging, I would say. But what we're seeing now is really a sort of I suppose you'd call it productivity increasing and people getting used to it at home. Obviously, there's challenges, I think, in terms of, people have children, they've got different things happening at home, technology piece in terms of how you work from home, your broadband, all that sort of stuff. Like, we've seen technical issues here this morning. That's just the nature of working from home. And I think it's that adaptability. But I think the challenge is one of I definitely see a huge increase in remote working in the next few years. I think it's been proven that we can do it, and we've been talking about it for a long time, so it's going to happen. But I think we are, as people, we're social, right? So effectively, we like that social interaction, and I think Zoom and all these products are fantastic, but they don't actually give you a full sort of social interaction, and there's challenges in terms of, particularly in negotiation meetings and things like that, around, understanding people's body language and that type of thing, and it's a huge challenge. So I think lots of people will want to go back to the office. Lots of people with 6 kids like myself at home, running around and draining on the broadband, are going to want to get back to the office. But then there's also, huge challenges around performance management of people at home. You know what I mean? How do you get the most out of someone at home? Because some people are more used to it than others. Some people perform better in an office, and then you've just the logistics of working from home, you know what I mean, that are a challenge. So I do think we'll see a shift into it, but not completely 100%.
So if I was to put that another way, Colin, so do you see that, let's say, I'm taking a number out the top of my head, let's say 10 out of 100 people pre-COVID-19 were working from home. Do you expect that number to rise in the future?
Definitely, I would say within a year that will rise to about 20% at least, and will continue to grow as we move on. The problem is the technology. One of the issues, and we bleated on about it in because we're a regional based organization, we've 70 offices, and broadband is just a massive issue for people. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like it really shows now that, you know what I mean, the lack of investment in broadband in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, it's catching up on us dramatically. If that was in place, absolutely, you would see, I think, a huge amount of people working from home. I think the big cultural thing, though, is leaders definitely understood, I think, that you know, people would work as hard from home. I think managers, you know what I mean, and probably more junior managers had to be convinced of that, because I think when you lack confidence in a management perspective, you like to be able to sort of touch and feel and talk to, you know what I mean, talk to people in the sense of see them, you know, what's going on, bring them into a meeting and that type of thing. So I think that confidence will start to build as we move on during this crisis. People will just get more confident. I'm seeing, like, my mother, 80 years of age, going onto a Zoom call and talking to me, you know what I mean? And where she could hardly use a smartphone 2 years ago. So I think it's the cultural change has actually happened. Do you know what I mean? And it's a really, really good thing. But, you know, I do think we'll see an increase, but ultimately we're social animals, and, you know, we'll want to be getting back together, maybe in an office environment as well.
Well, I think that what you said there has a couple of implications on the economy. Number one is house prices, actually, because you're right, Colin, geez, it's so like predicated on broadband. I mean, if you had bulletproof broadband anywhere in the country, and you could have a city job, whether it's Dublin or London, and simply to be able to go into the office on 1 or 2 days a week, particularly for introverts, then you would see lesser demand for accommodation where the previous need would have had to have been there all the time. So that has an impact. One thing that I have been asked to do, like you as well, I have in our training business, we were supposed to have a range of in-person events. I speak at a lot of conferences, as you mentioned. We run transition year work placement programs for students as well in companies, and also then I was also supposed to deliver part of our financial training business for in other parts of the world as well, and all of that just dissolved in front of me exactly around about a month ago. However, in all adversity, of course, comes where you do have to think about opportunity on two different customers potentially. Where we've the proposals in and they're solidified by now, is to create a digital internship. And this is for companies where their main pipeline tool for at the graduate level is for summer interns to come in and get an experience in the business, some for weeks, some for months, and they simply can't do that anymore. So they came to us and they said, right, is there a way in which we could recreate not a virtual experience, but also almost like a virtual reality? How do we make them feel like they're in the business, but at the same time they would be working from home, they would never come into the business at all? But also we need them to be self-sufficient. Like if I have a summer intern for 9 months and I assign them the buddy will check in with them and they have coffee with them and so on like that. So they said, like, how could we build a remote digital internship, but where the people themselves would be self-sufficient. So with the proposal, for example, we had, okay, here's a way in which we could give them a step-by-step guided data set, and then they would have to extract findings out of the data. Or here was where we could set up structured Zoom calls where there was going to be an objective from the meeting, because you don't have time to build up that, well, you know, what are you interested in and what are your career aspirations, where we kind of have to accelerate that. And so when I spoke to this company about it, it was just interesting. A month before, this was infeasible, right? Sorry, not infeasible. It was always feasible. It just wouldn't have been considered. There wasn't that captive audience. Whereas it was, okay, could we do it? Could you do it within a month? And we said we could. And then though, it's interesting how the conversation then changed. And I'd be interested in your view on will there be a difference in recruiting processes? Then, the conversation was, well, actually, could this actually be an interesting recruiting tool in the future for the summer internship? So could it be that rather than waiting and giving students, incoming students, let's say 6 months or 9 months experience, could we let them go through this self-sufficient virtual reality experience, which would thus be the interview process for the longer one? And therefore it would refine our interviewing process, because what we would be creating is entirely scalable. If 20 or 200 people did it, because it's self-sufficient and it's online, there would be a much lesser draw on resources. And I've also heard people now having completely virtual inductions. Of course, we're now hearing an awful lot more of in-person interviewing, but happening on Zoom. So I don't expect all of this to stick, but and I do certainly want to pick up on the points about the global supply chains and how that's changed as a result of COVID-19. But could you maybe just talk a little bit about the recruiting process, particularly? I love your idea of the slingshot, by the way, and the IMF put numbers on your slingshot.
I patented that, Susan, so don't be going out. You need to reference it every time you use it.
Okay, you're first. Just while you're getting ready to answer us on that, like the IMF are now saying that we would be expecting a fall of 6.8% in economic growth this year, but a 6.3% growth next year. Now, that's not the same thing, right? That's not 100 going down and then go back up again, without getting into the mathematics behind it. But they're very much mirroring that analogy, Colin. So if you have to leave people off quickly, or if you have to change the nature of where you're decreasing your supply of labour quickly, how do you scale up the demand for labour then, and ultimately go and implement it? Because I know we could turn to FRS recruitment and then solve the problem, by the way, of course. Like what's your answer to that? How do you if recruiting needs to mirror economic growth, how do you increase your workforce by 6% a year?
So I think people probably don't know this, but myself and yourself did a master's together with the University of Ulster a number of years ago, and my dissertation was on artificial intelligence in recruitment, right? So I think one of the areas I looked at was how artificial intelligence will change recruitment. And I think one of the things you will see, so what happens is in a recession, right, you get lots more people applying for jobs, right? So effectively, if you had 100 people, if you had 10 people applying for a job, pre-COVID-19, post-COVID-19, you're probably going to have 50. Okay, so as an organization, how do you handle that influx of volume? Because I suppose what organizations, particularly the mid and bigger size organizations, have been trying to do is create better employer brands, right? So that's a really critical thing for an organization to do. They need to have a really, I suppose, good employer brand which reflects their normal brand. So they got to treat candidates really, really well. But the problem is when you start getting volume applications into a system, it's really, really difficult when you're just using people to do that, to actually handle that. So the first thing and they're already out there, a lot of the big organizations are using chatbots at the front end. So effectively, the chatbot becomes the front end of your recruitment process. The person puts up their CV, goes in, and they basically chat with a robot, and the robot will ask them questions about how many years they've been in a particular job, what are their skills, attributes, etc., etc. And organizations will use that first line to effectively pick the people that are suitable to take to the second line. At the second line, they'll use assessment technology, and that's happening already. We've brilliant companies in Ireland like Cutty down in Galway, Pymetrics, who basically do the assessment piece online and at scale. And I think then you get it down to manageable sort of levels. So we're definitely going to see that. And look, that investment has been happening dramatically. Like HR tech, last year in the US alone, there was $2 billion in investment in HR tech, new HR tech products that were coming to the market. So we're going to see that grow exponentially, I think, over the coming years. But we still will need those people at the back end to make the decision, because ultimately, artificial intelligence or a robot doesn't have judgment on someone. So I suppose that people piece of actually weighing up everything and understanding, particularly culturally, whether someone's fit for your business, really will always be done by a person. So I think we'll have more of a mix, more technology used. I think, and it's really technology as an enabler rather than just technology for technology's sake. Big companies like we've now got, and I suppose it's quite controversial, products like HireView, which is a video interviewing technology, which can effectively, they say, can tell whether you're telling lies in a video or not when you're recorded by your facial recognition. There's a whole other argument around, whether that's ethical or not, but effectively the technology exists. So, and companies are relying on it. EY use it, other big organizations use this type of technology. So I think we're going to see a shift. Recessions and this happened in the last recession, organizations, particularly large organizations, actually shift really quickly during they use these times to, I suppose, move into the next, I suppose, areas that they need to be more productive and choose better people. But again, coming back to it, these organizations want the best people and are all competing for the best people. And that's not going to change after this recession. ultimately, we will see more people unemployed. You know, there's absolutely, in my opinion anyway, there's absolutely no doubt about that. But we'll still see a war for talent at the other end of it, because organizations, as they start to progress, typically, in recruitment, we tend to see this earlier than other organizations. We see upturns quite earlier, and we see downturns earlier. So now I'm talking about in a normal sense of an economy. So effectively what happens is, as an economy picks up and a bit more confidence comes in at the front end, companies start to look and say, well, we need, you know, R&D people, and they're looking at the R&D people, and then they're looking at the sales people and the sales pipeline, etc. And they hire at the front end. And at the recessionary end, what we see is basically companies see recessions typically earlier than most, particularly the large companies. You know, so they see the demand slipping for their product or service, and then they start to take their foot off the gas. They stop hiring, and you know, so in a normal sort of situation, we see that. But this has certainly not. And when you think about it, Susan, we're only a month into this. Like, it's like the longest month in history, really. Do you know what I mean? And it's been a challenge, like, for the organizations we deal with. For us as an organization, it's been a challenge. We've managed to keep everyone employed and onboarded, which has been fantastic. And as we're a cooperative, I suppose our deep values and very people-based values, you know what I mean? And our, I suppose, as FRS as an organization, is to try and get through this, come out the other end, and actually take up the opportunities that present themselves.
Well, that's where I think that you know, when we talk about what the problem is, as you've alluded to on this during the last 45 minutes, Colin, is that the as we pick up on the other side, that could present as many challenges or opportunities as the last month has, is because, like, whether it is dealing with the mass volume, or whether it is trying to put different technologies in place. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that. When you say that we're only a month in, we're only a month into this kind of really intense, as you mentioned, we did a master's together. This is a master's in life, and it's not, you know, it's not going to be over and anytime that's really soon. And just I do want to pick up on the point that you asked me earlier about the supply chains, because the supply chains are, and not just supply chains, but also business relationships, because when you're talking about goods, how you physically move one good to another is important, but when it comes to services, it can be a huge amount around business relationships. And I think probably many of us would have seen that maybe we didn't need as much international travel as we needed, and so on, but we still do. We still do need it. I have 2 customers in the States. We're online an awful lot, but the in-person element is important, and it's as important now as it ever was. So I don't think that we're going to see anything disappearing. But what I do think, and I would wonder, actually, I'd be interested in the audience's view on this, is that when I say to you in the future, Colin, you know, are you free for a coffee? Will you take that up as in person, or will you take that up as, yeah, I'll send you a link? And that's what I wonder, is what will our de facto be in the future? Because a lot of people would have saved a lot of time, I suppose, and energy from doing an awful lot more of the business relationship development online than they would have done before, because we were pushed into it. One question that has come in, and please do send in your questions. We're more than happy to answer them. But I'm going to pick up on this first, Colin, but then I go to you, which is, do we think some businesses may never or will incur long delays in resuming business the way they were before this happened? I'm thinking of hotels, pubs, coffee shops, etc. And that comes from Jerry Madden. And first of all, hello, Jerry. I know Jerry, and I'd say you do too, Colin. What I particularly just want to deal with the economic aspect of your question. I'll go to Colin on how quick they can resume. Here's what may be surprising to you, is that we're a small island. You know, we're a small island. We've 4-ish million people. We're very good at traveling. We're very good at having tourists here. Now, if you actually look at the decimation, let's say, of the way in which tourism and round about, McKinsey would report that we're in between, I'd say we're close to the higher end of this, but in between 50 to 90% of spend on hospitality has come to a halt in March. Sorry, well, from the second half of March to now, right? So the thing is that when that resumes, they have 2 markets. They have the domestic tourism, and then they have international tourism. But what's very, very striking is that the total amount of money spent by tourists, international in Ireland in 2019 was 6.8 billion, right? So 6.8 billion was what overseas travel to Ireland generated. That's a very significant amount of money, and if we have big restrictions on travel, obviously most of that would be challenged. However, Irish people, when we went abroad, we actually spent 7.9 billion. So the point is that when you take into consideration how much we could actually spend at home if we staycated, it's actually not that far away from what international tourists. So if we choose to stay at home instead of going abroad, if we go to the Wild Atlantic Way, if we go up to Colin in Tipperary, or if you go to Dublin, or if you go to Cork, or if you go wherever, then actually we could really fill up our own gap. Tourists don't come from Mars. At the same time, tourists come from different countries, and I see Colin there hiding a joke about Mars at Cork. Don't go there, Colin. Don't go there. But so the point is that we, as a nation, we can actually fill the gap that international tourism can. Now, of course, there's challenges there. Number one is, of course, will people want to go, and that's a part of our new normal. Is that social distancing is going to become simply a part of life for a considerable period of time, probably long beyond the summer. It's going to become part of the social contract. I am not going to go to Colin's house and Colin see himself and Jen and the 6 kids if I have been interacting in any way with the virus. And if I am going to be going up to their house, I'll probably be sitting in one room and shouting into them at the other. Is that's simply going to have to be a part of what it's going to be like. If I go out for dinner, I'm expecting that the restaurant is going to make sure that social distancing is there. So number one is that social contract and how that's going to form. The second thing is going to be, are people going to have the money to do so? And of course, we're going to see a contraction of 2 things. One is the amount of money people are going to have to spend if we see. Well, that depends on income cuts. Of course, we've seen a lot of that, and a lot of that has to wash out yet. But the second thing is consumer confidence. Is generally people's bank balances actually increase during a recession. I don't mean in absolute terms, but in relative terms, their savings ratios increase because, of course, they don't know what they're facing. So when you take all of those into consideration, the possibility is we could definitely fulfill a huge amount of what would be lost from international tourism. The question is whether the social contracts and the logistics will be in place, and secondly, whether we'll have the money and the want to do so. But I mean, that could certainly still be, probably better than people are expecting at the moment. The question now, though, I'd put back to you, Colin, is when it comes to like the most labour-intensive industries of all, like hospitality, how quickly from the word, we'll say from now, could they get started in the context, as I mentioned, I believe construction and non-essential manufacturing, and possibly some retail will start to open first. So what do you think when it comes to those very labour-intensive industries, and how logistically are they going to manage?
So I think the challenge is going to be, firstly, in terms of capital. So when a company comes back post COVID-19, it's got to have the money basically to put into this ultimately and pay people ultimately. So I think a lot of small, like most of these businesses are micro businesses or small businesses. So they need, and I think that's really where the support will come from, or should come from the government. That's a real critical piece, getting up and running and being able to pay people. They've also got to pay their suppliers, right? So if you're a restaurant, you've got to buy goods, and usually you'll get it on credit. Now, part of the problem will be when you return, a lot of the suppliers and manufacturers won't be that keen on giving small businesses credit, because they'll be thinking, are these guys going to be around in a month or two? So I think we're going to need to see support from the government to do that. But I think critically, they are people businesses, and to deliver a restaurant business, coffee shop, retail outlet, you know what I mean? They all require people to deliver it. So people will have to be hard back. I definitely see 100% of people being hard back in that sense. But yeah, I would say you would see, look, if you take a restaurant that employed 15 people, if I'm an owner of that restaurant, I'm coming back in and I'm going to try and get up and running for as little as I can, for as quick as I can, and build up. And probably you're looking at, you're looking at a critical mass required of probably 2/3 of the people, or 50% to 2/3 of the people. If you don't have that, you're not going to be able to operate anyway. So I think we will see those people hired back in a phased way, probably over a couple of months. But on a positive note, I just think there will be a huge pent-up demand in the economy for particular, I suppose, as you said, staycations, people staying at home. We're probably not going to see the amount of travel that we would normally see anyway for a while. So, there will be potentially the opportunity for people to spend money at home and that. So that sort of slingshot thing will hopefully happen, and we'll see those people coming back in.
And just speaking of hiring people back in, I suppose in many ways a straightforward question, but I don't know how much complexity you want to give the answer. How did FRS handle the last recession? So, if you want the Chinese say, saying, which is, if you want to know the road ahead, ask those coming back. Like we set up in 2010, but how did FRS Recruitment? How did you guys handle the last recession, and what did you do, and what are you learning from the last experience that's powering you up this time?
So, I think one of the things we made, and different businesses have different ways of looking at it, right? So you've got to look at the people that delivered for you for the past 10 years, right? You've got to sort of say, these people have created the surpluses, and obviously we're a cooperative, all the money goes back into the business. You've got to look at those people. You want to try and keep them on. They've supported us over the last number of years. I think we've seen organizations out there, cut pay across, IBEC released a survey yesterday, 15% of businesses have had pay cuts, you know what I mean, of up to 25%. So that's a decision. So really our philosophy was keep as many of our people on the pitch as we can. And that's been the same to date. I suppose, again, this is our anniversary year, 40 years. So we've seen lots of recession, lots of ups, lots of downs. And one of the things, and I think it was commented in the US this week, an awful lot of businesses are living on a wing and a prayer in terms of their capital reserves, right? So they've only got 2 months or 3 months. And that's a critical thing as an organization, you know what I mean? In order to sort of stay around for, these times, in terms of technological sort of change and, climate change, these things you've got to be able to adapt to them and come back. And one of the things is you've got to have, I suppose, the funds to actually deliver that. The other thing was looking at opportunities. So 2 things we did in the last recession was obviously keep yourself, look after the pennies and the pounds will sort of look after themselves. But secondly, we're an entrepreneurial organization. We looked at new ideas. So one was, I suppose, Tourist Nua, which was this help people back into employment. We've helped over 40,000 people back into employment, and we employ nearly 300 people in that business across 40 offices, and it's a huge success. And then we invested in technology. We created a startup called HerdWatch within the FRS family, and that provides technology to farmers right across the country. It won Earth Time Startup of the Year. So you've got to look at, I suppose, looking after the pennies on its own isn't good enough. You've got to be looking at innovation and looking at the future, and because standing still just isn't an option. You've got to be really moving fast. You know what I mean? Survival in itself, I would say, isn't enough. You've got to be looking at, how do you grow out of this, not just stand still to get out of it.
Well, I think that the growth aspect of how do you grow out of it, I think that's certainly the place where a lot of the focus has to be. And just another question that came in there, Colin, was what is what, in your opinion, is the best case scenario for the economy in the months ahead? I'd be reticent to put numbers around that, because I think that actually there's too many unknowns at the moment. But what I would say is I would micro take that question. Is that, while people like me love looking at big scale statistics, and we love looking at reports issued by the central bank and by the ESRI and the IMF and everyone else, is that really what your economy is what's going on around you. It's your own business, it's your own household, it's that kind of thing. So what I would say is that when it came to our own business, there was 3 things we had to do. Number 1 is that, and this comes from a simple point of resilience, is understanding what's actually facing you. Was when that in-person training just dissolved in front of us, is that we couldn't do anything anything about that very thing at the time, but instead to think about, okay, but how could we deal with this in a different way? Some, it was, okay, I understand that you want to cancel at the moment, but how about we postpone it, and what about putting a date in mind in the future? The second thing that we did is we had to get proactive about how to handle people's problems before they got to them themselves. So when it came, for example, to that digital internship, we had the situation whereby we went to with that company when they said, we don't want to do X, we want to do Y, is to jump in there and say, okay, yeah, but we can sort that for you. So before they start thinking something is a problem, is to be proactive with the solution and come up with the solution before they start to think about the problem. And of course, then the third thing is, what can you do entirely differently? And I think that's where, as a nation, we have to consider it. I've already mentioned, for example, about the online voucher, the online trading voucher. As I mentioned about the innovation partnership, there's also business continuity voucher. Now it's a small voucher, but it could be of interest to people as well. So this is where you can apply for some consultancy around how to reshape your business, whether it's the business model, whether it is ICT support around work from home, as Ger Corrigan asked us about, or around different technology enablers, as I see Louise O'Connor has been commenting on there. There's a range of things you can do like that. Then there's the sustainability, the Sustainable Business Fund from Enterprise Ireland as well. This is for companies over 10 staff, and this is where they're giving loans. Well, but they say that they're loans or else equity investments for up to 800,000 with a view, and that's for manufacturing and internationally traded services. So I think that I would say that the second thing beyond organizational resilience and being understanding of what you can do is engage with the government supports that are there. And then the third thing is simply to engage with your customers. And when I say customers, I mean past and current, is having conversations, just, and I've been doing that a lot. I don't know about you, Colin, but, I've had more time to kind of say, oh, I should give such and such person a call. And even our own conversations that we had recently, we've been promising to meet for a long time. And it's great now we have to bring several hundred people with us along the way. But, is that I would also reach out to people, and business relationships are there. And what I would say is take heed of Colin's message around the point of the future demand is going to be there. It is going to be there. And how are you going to take that? And maybe it's not as you know now. Maybe you don't want to have a business anymore and you want to go and work with someone. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you are in business and you have to orientate it. But I would say that the change could come. I think things will happen fast, but the overall structures will be gradual. And along the way, there's an awful lot you can do to create your own best case for your own scenario as best you can, in the understanding of the difficulties that everybody faces.
Yeah, I think just in terms of during our last recession, right, which was, like, let's not put any bones about it, was catastrophic for both the country and hundreds of thousands of people in the country. And I did a presentation the other day online with a couple of thousand recruiters, and I put up a picture of the Irish Independent from 2010, the day the IMF arrived in Ireland, right? And we all thought that was a horrendous day. You know what I mean? We all looked back and went, at the time, I think everyone just thought, my God, this is the worst it could be. And it did take us a bit of time to get over, but not too long, really, when you think about it. I think by about, like, that was 2010, by 2013, the economy was starting to really pick up again. By 2016, we had the fastest growing economy in Europe, and we've had over 6% growth for the last few years. So we're a very open, I think the underlying nature of the Irish economy in terms of its openness, or attractiveness in terms of FDI, and the fantastic organizations we have working in the country, our resilience as a people, do you know what I mean? And, our ability to sort of bounce back, shouldn't be lost on people. So I think we should, not forget that we've got over, you know what I mean, previous recessions much better than other countries did. Like, if you look at Greece, like, you know what I mean, really they were left behind, and we could have been left behind like them. But we bounced back. So listen, Susan, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to you today. Obviously, we've had some technical difficulties with Kevin, but it's really come at it a lot from, I suppose, the macro level. Some really, really good, points from you there in terms of supports. ultimately going out there and what we might do, Susan, is we might send a mail around to attendees after this, just, I suppose, outlining those different supports that are out there at the moment, because I don't think a lot of people tend to look at the high level stuff and not delve into some of the, other supports in there that could help them. We did a poll at the start, and I suppose we asked, and it is very difficult to figure out, but how long do you think it will be before the economy returns to normal? So I think over 50% of people think 1 to 2 years, like 11% more than 2 years, 30% 6 to 12 months. One person thinks within a month, so they're obviously really, really positive individuals, which is great. But I think for me, that's the huge challenge, is around the timing of this thing. It's a timing issue ultimately. When are we going to get back? And you know what I mean? And how are we going to get back is the real question for us, isn't it? So.
Well, it is. I mean, I'll finish on this brief story that I know anybody who's heard me before has probably heard me say recently, and that is that so imagine, Colin, that I go into a hotel in Tipperary, and I say, you know what, I think I'm going to stay here tonight. I have a meeting in the morning with a very important gentleman called Colin Donnery, but I just want to take a look at the room before I stay. And then they say, okay, but we need a deposit, so I get €50. So then the hotel owner goes over to the fruit and veg shop, and they say, here's €50 for the fruit and veg that we bought there last week. And then the fruit and veg shop goes over to the butcher and says, here is the €50 that we owed you last week because we needed something for marinade. And then the butcher goes to the restaurant and says, here's €50 that we owed you from last week because we took people out for lunch. And then the restaurant goes back to the hotel and they said, here is the €50 for somebody who was here visiting on business. So I come down the stairs anyway, and then I'd say, actually, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm after getting a call from Dublin. I need to get back up. And so I'm actually not going to stay tonight, and I get my €50 back. And I sit into my car. There was no new money created, but simply it just moved, and yet everybody was paid. You see, the thing about the economy is that it's actually not about the quantum of money that we have, it's about the speed at which it moves. Yeah. And the term of that is called the velocity of money. And that is what's going to predicate that poll and how quickly people are right, is how quickly we can get money moving. Partly, as I mentioned, is the productive capacity, is that we need to be able to have outlets to actually spend in. And of course, we don't have a lot of those at the moment. And then on the other hand, we also need to earn it and to thus spend it. So whether it is, changing the staycation idea around, and Miriam had some very interesting points to make on that there in the chat, or whether it is how our supply chains change, or whether it is how quickly how quickly that slingshot happens, and in that, as that slingshot is coming back, and as we get people recruited again, is it going to be in the same way? It's through the same methodologies? Are people going to have the same qualifications? Are they going to have the same hunger? And are they going to have the same? Are they going to be working the same way, or will they be even better? And I think all of that comes to bear. So, Colin, I want to really thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to check in with you.
Great to virtually hook up.
Yes, so. Exactly. Exactly, indeed. Exactly. And thank you very much to everyone who sent in a question and chat as well.
So thanks. No, you're very good, Susan. Thanks a million. So we'll have another webinar next Thursday at 12 o'clock. We've the ex-Waterford hurler, Shane O'Sullivan, who is now, I suppose, a high performance coach, and he'll be talking to us about how we balance performance management and workplace well-being. So how you keep those things going. We were looking for a good Cork hurler, but we just couldn't bloody find any of them. So
other things in demand. That's it.
Yeah. On that note, Susan, thanks a million. God bless.
Thank you, Colin.
God bless. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.